Okay, welcome everybody to Friday afternoon of Summer Fishtrap 2020. It's good to see your faces. We have a great lineup of events and readers today and right on through Sunday morning. So I hope your workshops this morning went well. And I'm excited to introduce our first reader of the afternoon, Leni Zumas. Man, her name was everywhere the past couple of years. I kept hearing it everywhere I go, and about her novel, Red Clocks. And Fishtrap has been trying to form a relationship with Portland State University for years. And I thought, I'm just going to reach out and see if Leni would be interested in coming to Summer Fishtrap. And she got back right away and said, I'd love to. So we're really happy to have Leni as part of the community of writers and thinkers who gather here. And she's going to read. Now, Leni provided a pre-recorded reading, which we'll play, and then we'll be here live afterwards for a Q&A. Leni Zumas directs the MFA program at Portland State University, and the book I was talking about, Red Clocks, won the 2019 Oregon Book Award and was a national best-selling novel. It was shortlisted for the Orwell Prize for political fiction and the Neukom Prize for speculative fiction. Red Clocks was, get this, a New York Times Book Review Editor's Choice and was named a Best Book of 2018 by The Atlantic, the Washington Post, the Huffington Post, and the New York Public Library. That is so great. Zumas is also the author of Farewell Navigator, Stories, and the novel The Listeners. So I would like to welcome Leni, and I think I'll just play the video right now.
Hi, Fishtrap. I'm Leni. Today I'm going to read part of a story, a longer story that's called That. Before you tell me it was inappropriate to contact you, before you remind me it all happened a long time ago, before you suggest I'm embittered by my lack of success, have you heard all the facts? A decade ago, I enrolled in a low-ranked graduate program in creative writing at a Midwestern university. The annual tuition and fees totaled almost 20 grand. I received no funding from the school. My mother at the time earned 26 grand a year. I got a job at the Dining Commons and took out a student loan, which 10 years later, I am nowhere close to paying off. It was not my first loan. I still owed plenty on what I'd borrowed for undergrad. I'd heard that if you went back to school, you could pause the monthly payments on existing debt. And my secret wish was to be a writer. I can't remember what shape exactly ambition made inside me, but I know I had some, and it was thrilling. Members of the committee, I'm bitter, it's true, but this doesn't change the facts. My first term in the program, I was too scared to register for a fiction workshop. I fulfilled the literature requirements instead. I kept my studio apartment clean. I made the loan money stretch farther by stealing food during shifts at the Dining Commons, not difficult once I figured out who could be trusted. I went days without speaking to anyone except my salad station customers, most of them girls. I watched the girls register the disharmony between me and the celery, me and the spinach leaves. How could someone who looked like that sell salad? Wondered their slender, wilting brains. In December, I stocked up on dry goods, nuts, cereals, tortilla chips to get me through winter break. Spring term, I forced myself to take a workshop. 10 of us sat in a circle while Professor Sedgwick paced the perimeter or stood at the blackboard chalking rules. Refrain from the givens. If your nerve deny you, go above your nerve. Thaddeus, as he told us to call him, was a tall white man with sandy hair cut short above a high, smooth forehead. He looked like a surfer too long away from the sun. The first story I submitted was about a woman who tries to count every hair on her body. It began like this. Pluck 3 hairs from the loaf of your pubis, put them on your tongue. A not now girl's hairs taste more mineral than a not yet's. Thaddeus hated the story. It reeked of the precious, he said, pathology du jour, and I had a terrible command of hyphenation. I lived in the same rotten apartment building as a woman named Romy. She was a second year, full of advice. Make sure to take Professor Unthank's Poetry of Horror class. Don't walk past the frat houses after dark. Don't let Thaddeus pay for your drinks after workshop at the Swan with 2 necks. Although you won't have to worry, she said. Why? I said. You're not his type. Which is, I said. Super pretty in like a delicate way, and brown. Members of the committee, I am white. Did he buy your drinks? I asked. I'm not delicate, Romy said. You are delicate. Girl, please. Romy wore her hair in pigtails wrapped with grocery twist ties and went around in a coat made of fake rabbit fur. She was from Los Angeles and, she confessed one night when drunk, kind of rich. Kind of rich? I tried not to seem angry because I wanted us to be friends. She hadn't received funding either, but it was no problem for her parents to cover the tuition and fees. They would have helped her rent a nice apartment, but Romy had insisted on the Lion Arms because she wanted the experience of living in a shithole. Her immigrant grandparents, she told me before throwing up a little into her hand, worked themselves to the bone in code-violating restaurants so that she could choose to live in a shithole. I checked Thaddeus's first novel, Late Goers, out of the library. It was neither terrible nor good. I haven't read his newest, the one getting all the buzz. Then I churned out 22 pages of something similar. She reached for the young deer as if to caress its tenderling, but instead of petting the antler bud, she brought her fist down onto it. When the brothers came home, pissed as Baptists, they found the animal dead on the yard stones. I added a few of my own swerves and flourishes for disguise, and I called the story, I Will Make You Regret It. Though it wasn't due for another week, I emailed it to Thaddeus with a little note, would love to hear your thoughts before I distribute. The next day, he left the following letter in my department mailbox. Dear Eleanor, bravo, just bravo. Or is it brava in your case? I can't remember and I'm too drunk to locate a dictionary. Ha, joking, I'm not too drunk, but the wind is up and the bald cypress are shaking like the devil's seeds, which keeps me at the typewriter. I see no need to give you any so-called feedback, any bloodless little grocery list of omissions and errors, because your story is beautiful. I'm sort of in love with your story. I come from the mountains too, did you know that? I come from people who can't pronounce banal. When your narrator says, leave me to myself in the hollow, I know precisely what the hell she means. I read a few paragraphs to my wife. She's a lowlander, but was impressed all the same. Can we meet to talk about this marvel? Ever yours, Thaddeus. The sentence, I'm sort of in love with your story, thrust a wet wire deep into my chest, where it sizzled and twitched. At the bottom of the letter, he had added in red pen, not at the Swan, mind coming to my house, Saturday, 5 p.m.? Thaddeus typically held conferences at the Swan with 2 necks because his campus office smelled like work. And as for meeting in a coffee shop, what were we, teenagers? I took a bus to an outskirts neighborhood. Thaddeus's address was a sweet-looking bungalow situation. He had mentioned in class that the house was a rental. I found out later it was owned by Thaddeus's wife, who had a name, though I never once heard him use it. He opened the door in his pale blue sweatshirt and jeans and bare feet. Hey, come on back. You want a beer? No, thank you, I said. On our quick march through the dining room, I saw a wall of photographs, all of the same red-haired, narrow-faced woman. Thaddeus was hugging her in a few of the shots, but mostly it was just the woman, this stern white flamingo. Beyond the kitchen was a glassed-in porch where a typewriter rested on a butcher block facing a yard of crooked trees. I sat on the hard pink wadding of a wicker sofa. My teacher straddled an office chair, swiveled to face me, and rested his chin on the chair back. "You wrote such a beautiful story," he said. "Thanks," I said. "I mean, holy fuck, Eleanor, it hits on all sixes, so much better than that Ann Carson in a locked ward nonsense you turned in the first time. Where are you from?" "Monroe County, Ohio," I said. He grinned. "A fellow Appalachian." "Yep," I said. "Whereabouts exactly?" "Near Graysville," I said. Thaddeus nodded. The chair was so close I could make out the white star at the center of a red pimple above his eyebrow. He said, "I'm going to nominate you for the Cravac." "Seriously?" I said. "If you're from Monroe County, I know you've never seen that kind of money in your life." The Cravac Prize was $10,000. "Whereas," said Thaddeus, "all those shitty von Schatzsteins in your cohort, like, what's his name, Zach?" Thaddeus shook his head. "You hear he just bought a new Prius, factory fresh? That kid is fucking 23. My dad paid our rent in cash every month. Didn't trust banks, so he kept his money in the chest freezer." "Smart," I said, thinking of Romy's face when I told her. "By the way, I won the Cravac." Thaddeus frowned. "I also hope, Eleanor, that you're able to understand your weight problem in the context of poverty. It's a systemic epidemic, not just individual weakness. I saw it all the time back home. God, the stigma. Being fat and poor as a woman, you're double fucked." I am typing this part slowly, wishing to nail each word to the page exactly as it came out of his mouth. When I made my statement to the university lawyer, I spoke slowly. Being fat and poor. She recorded it on her phone. As a woman. "I'd like to see you harness that pain," Thaddeus continued, "the double fuckedness. You gesture at it, but never go there. What does it feel like, for instance, Eleanor, to be sitting across from a 6'2" adult male with good muscle tone and to know that you weigh more than he does?" I stared at him. "Not a rhetorical question," he said. "What does it feel like?" I shrugged. I was thinking, I won the Cravac, won the Cravac, won the Cravac. "If you're going to be an artist," Thaddeus said, "you cannot be afraid of shit like this." He yawned and clasped his hands together, stretched his arms out in front of him. The interlaced fingers came to rest on my right shoulder. What had happened to all the words I knew? The fingers were pressing, thudding into my collarbone. His sweatshirt sleeves smelled of the same detergent my mom used. "Won the Cravac, won the Cravac." He said softly, leaning forward, "Do mountain girls like it vertical?" I lowered my shoulder until the fingers slid off. "Sorry, but, God, joking." He swiveled away, slapped his palms on the butcher block. "I was joking. Your title is melodramatic. Change it before you pass out copies to the class, okay?" He was staring through the glass at the bald cypress. I pulled on my coat and left. Having missed the last bus into town, I had to walk for almost an hour. My mouth tasted like blood. The taste was worth it, I decided, because of the prize nomination. My entry would be due soon. I'd need to come up with a new title and maybe cut the part about the raccoons being ground up in the diner's burger meat. "What the fuck, girl?" Romy stood on the front steps of the Lion Arms in her fake rabbit coat, took one last suck of a cigarette and threw it on the frozen lawn. "Your face is weird," she said. "Are you crying?" "It's sweat," I said. "It's like 10 degrees out." "I was exercising. Pardon me." I stepped around her, brought out my key. "Good night," she yelled after me. I kept the Cravac nomination to myself for days, did not even call my mother. I wrote generous comments on Zach's workshop story. I went shopping in an actual supermarket, picking out things you couldn't get at the dining commons. clove-studded chocolate, artichoke hearts, pesto in a tube. After I'd paid for my delicacies, I steered outside and waited while a woman with a neon pink visor on her gray curls tried to nudge her cart back into the row. It refused to fit, kept snagging, misaligning. I finally said, "You need to really slam it." "I will not do violence," she muttered, backing away. I slammed hers and mine in together. On the first warm day of spring, headed to campus under a flame blue sky, I finally told Romy the news. She stopped walking, squinted at the air above my head. "Is a professor allowed to nominate more than one student?" "No," I said. "Oh," she said. "What?" I said. A small stony laugh came out of Romy. She swung her arms in big circles until her backpack fell off. Stooping to retrieve it, she said, "Well, he nominated me too." "But that's not possible," I said. She shrugged. "He CC'd me on the email." I had not been CC'd on any goddamn email. "For your Nurses in Los Angeles novel?" I said. Try not to sound shocked as fuck, Eleanor. The discussion of my story, whose title was now Tenderling, lasted 15 minutes. Thaddeus said nothing at all, a signal to my classmates that they were free to pile on. "I'm troubled by the stereotyping of Appalachian culture," someone said. "Okay, so the deer's symbolic, but of what?" someone said. "This feels kind of derivative," someone said. I stared at the fingers that had rested on my shoulder. Under every nail on his left hand was a crescent of brown dirt. Thaddeus didn't wear a wedding ring because artists had a duty to refrain from the givens. The right-hand nails were clean. Romy pointed out the beauty of some of my images, such as the bruised antler bud and the narrator counting the wings of dead flies while she crouched in her hiding place. But before she could cite a third example, Thaddeus cut in. "I think we've said what needs to be said. Let's call it a night. I'll be posting up at the Swan if anyone wants to join." "The first assignment you turned in for Professor Sedgwick's class," said the university lawyer, glancing down at a thickness of papers, "involved the eating of pubic hair. Did you intend for this to be provocative?" "As in thought-provoking?" I said. "As in sexually." "Just because the hair is near a sexual organ," I said, "does not mean it's sexual hair." "Calm down," said the lawyer. I was calm, except at the salad station, where the knife kept slipping. Some blood found its way onto the corn niblets. I thought the red drops relieved the boredom of the yellow, but my supervisor did not agree. There was no official investigation. The university lawyer scheduled something called a conciliation session, at which Thaddeus and I sat at either end of a huge, shining table. The lawyer sat at one of the long sides with an old-fashioned tape recorder, and an assistant dean was hunched on a stool by the door. I explained again what had happened. Fat and poor, fingers, do mountain girls like it vertical. Thaddeus, who had not even dressed up, who had come in his goddamn blue sweatshirt, looked at the lawyer. "Do you sincerely believe," he asked in a tight, quiet voice, "I would force myself on that?" The lawyer laughed. Sweat gushed down my ribcage into the creases, every hair drowned and uncountable. Members of the committee, have any of you ever been that? Thanks very much.
Here are some of the comments, Leni. I think you can probably see them. Applause. Wow, riveting, powerful. Yay, Leni. Wow, thank you. Thanks, everyone. You did reply to it. Does anybody have any questions for Leni? This is part of a new work that you're working on?
No, it's actually part of a story that was published in Granta. It's maybe 3/4 of the story, but I didn't want to kind of go over time. So there is more to the story than that. It doesn't end there, but that's the first, I don't know, maybe 2/3 to 3/4 of the story.
Can we access that?
There is on Granta, you can find it online. There's a paywall I just discovered. So what I did for my workshop, and I'd be happy to send it to you, Mike, is just I uploaded a PDF of the entire story. So
you could also upload it into the connect or discussions tile on Canvas, or you can send it to me and we can do that.
Okay, cool.
Yeah,
if I can figure it out, I'll upload it, and if I have trouble, I'll send you the PDF.
Maul wrote, Thaddeus is so believable. I hate him. Yeah, we all know Thaddeus in one way or another.
Yeah.
We've been talking about what?
In part, I picked this story to read because we are at a writing conference, and whether or not any of us have done MFAs or not done MFAs, I think one of the reasons I wrote the story was to explore the different power dynamics and class dynamics and gender dynamics that are at play in any corner of publishing and sort of the professionalization of writing, and in ways that sometimes get erased or glossed over, and then the people who are hurt by those dynamics like are still hurt, but their hurt can't be made visible. And so writing the story was a way to delve into that visibility.
Yeah. That, as we've seen in the last year, also in Hollywood and all around, people talking about these very important issues. Elizabeth Records says, I can't wait to see what happens next. All too universal in academia. Alexander Ortega writes, not knowing that there's more of a story for the intents and purposes of reading a story that needs to be abridged, how do you find a cut point but still convey the power of a story such as this? I would have thought that was a complete story had I not known.
Well, thanks, Alex, for that question. And one of the things I've been talking about with my workshop members, who are all, by the way, fantastic. It's such a great group of writers. I'm really honored to be working with all of you. You know, I had shared that one of my tendencies as a writer is to kind of end on a note that sounds sort of like an ending, but that might be ending prematurely because I'm either afraid of what comes next, or I don't know how to write it, or I'm not really sure where to go next. And so maybe what you're picking up on, Alex, is like that's a point at which I probably did want to end this story, but I did force myself to kind of push through and examine more fully what the consequences of this character's choice, because basically what she's doing is she's writing to the selection committee for a prize that her former teacher is a finalist for, and so the kind of present moment of this story is she's actually trying to at least intervene in a process that hasn't finished yet, by telling the committee her experience with him as a teacher. And one of the things that I kind of hope for the story, and I don't know if this will affect all readers, or maybe it's not, I don't know whether it's successful, is the understanding that even though she is sharing these things, that it might not matter at all, and that this guy might still win, and to ask, like, should it matter, right? Like, should this particular set of behaviors influence a committee of people who's deciding whether to honor him with the prize, right? And hoping to raise the question and explore the question, but not have a sort of quick or easy answer to it. So anyway, to get back to Alex's question, yeah, I think I was likely tempted to end there, but then probably, and I'm glad I didn't, but I think it could have been an ending point. And sometimes, as I don't know who first said this, it's sort of the famous saying, like, we don't finish work, we just abandon it. And so I also was writing this with a deadline. So I probably yeah, abandoned it at some point, that I could have kept going, but
Great.
yeah.
Here is a question from Victoria. How do you decide the pacing of the intensity or the rhythm?
Victoria, will you say more about that? Because I think I know what you mean, but I want to make sure I'm getting your question right.
Sure. Thank you. So what I noticed was that the moments that were, really sinking my gut got progressively more intense, I thought, and I thought more about the pain, the scumbag, the yuck factor, and I thought it gave me recovery time between those moments. And I kept looking at my husband going, and I don't think readers can take that much of it all at once. And I steer clear of reading some of the more intense writing because I really can't handle it. So how do you judge what your readers can handle? That's the question.
Yeah, I don't know if I do. It's a good question. I'm not sure that the handling part, because it's so hard to know. I mean, readers are all different, and it's really hard to think, for me at least, to think about what a kind of large group of or collective people would be able to handle or not. I think probably I have in my head a few people or kind of ideal readers who maybe I'm using them as a gauge. I guess in this case, I mean, one of the elements of this story, when I started out writing it, I was like, well, what this is, again, I was writing it I wrote it in 2018, I think. So that was, Me Too was already well underway. And there were a lot of stories, similar stories about sexual harassment or sexual assault, or people kind of using their power over someone else to get sexual favors from them. But I also was thinking about, ever since I've been, I did my MFA a long time ago, but even then I was very aware of how, in a classroom, someone, if we were discussing the work of a person in the class who had in fact been hit on by the guy teaching the class, and, some of us knew about it, some of us didn't, how that kind of affected the dynamics. So I was thinking too of not so much what a reader could handle, but like what I was going to kind of add to this collection of narratives, like why was I writing the story? And one of the things that I don't see represented as often in Me Too stories is a sense of the kind of ways in which I'll say American society, because that's what I know, relentlessly kind of pressures women identifying people to look certain ways and be sexually attractive, and whether or not they're receiving wanted sexual attention, and what happens when there's also at play someone feeling like, for whatever reason, or being made to feel like that she's not sexually attractive, and yet she's still receiving this sexual attention. So I wanted to throw that body shaming and body image issues kind of into the mix in a way that I don't as often see it in that mix. Yeah, I don't think that answered your question, Victoria, but that's a little bit of what I was thinking about.
There's so many questions that are coming in. I'm going to try to compress a few of them into one. People are talking a lot about the character Thaddeus and how did you, let's see, how do you keep Thaddeus from becoming a caricature? What kind, and then Kyle says, what kind of challenges do you find in writing a character like Thaddeus?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, those are great questions. I mean, here's what I find to be the biggest challenge, honestly, is, and this came up too when I, in my recent novel, Red Clocks, I've gotten questions from audience members like, oh, this guy is kind of a stereotype, or the male character is sort of a caricature, or whatever. And my challenge is I've known like way too many actual real life living, breathing, like human beings who act exactly like Thaddeus. And so they themselves are performing some really stereotypical behavior in a way that, again, if I'm thinking about wanting to be accurate to a certain kind of maybe conglomerate of men I've known and who kind of get put into this one character, part of me is like, do I need to like I sort of feel resentful, like, do I need to like make him well-rounded when actually this particular behavior is the way that he's performing in the world, and like that is available to a lot of the people in his life, like so it becomes almost a personal resistance sometimes. And obviously at the level of craft, I mean, as both a writer and a teacher of writing, I'm not gonna say like, oh no, I want him to be a total like two-dimensional stereotype, but neither do I want to go in the direction of like, oh, let's because this story is really about the narrator, and like the effects on her life of his behavior. It's not about, let's try to understand and sympathize with Thaddeus's behavior. And I, as I say these things, I kind of hear myself. I can understand how that would sound, I don't know, limiting, or, well, Leni, why don't you want to investigate his humanity? But I think so much of the problem with these sorts of power dynamics is that the person, sometimes it's a woman, sometimes it's a guy, or a non-binary person, it depends, but the person who is being made to feel like all that matters about them is their sexual, their service as a sexualized object. For that person, like there's most of their humanity is being denied, right, in those. And one of the things I've observed about people's experiences in like writing programs or job situations where they come out feeling like maybe their writing is horrible and doesn't matter, and that they were only getting praised for it because the person doing the praising wanted to sleep with them, and like this kind of erasure of like everything else about their existence as a human being. And so while I wouldn't say that I'm trying to do the same thing to Thaddeus or a character like him, I'm also aware of just my own feelings of, letting him roll as he rolls, and not spending the energy making him as well-rounded. So I mean, it's something I continue to think about and struggle with in my work, and I haven't arrived at some kind of hard and fast principle about it. But yeah.
Great, thanks. Here's a nuts and bolts question that Whitney sent to me privately. I think she meant to send it to everybody, but dialogue. We always talk about dialogue, and Whitney says, your use of dialogue is incredibly effective. What's your strategy for knowing when and when not to use dialogue to build intensity?
Thanks, Whitney. So here's my confession about how I feel about dialogue. I don't know where I got this idea, really, but I see dialogue is one of the less difficult things for me to write. As if I were to say, what's easier, Leni, writing like a scene of dialogue or a really well rendered naturescape or landscape. You know, one of the things that I've been so impressed by with, you know, my students this week is like how beautifully and sharply and intensely you're writing the land and writing the kind of settings of that your characters are in. And that's not something that comes easily to me. And so dialogue is like, it's a lot less arduous. And therefore I think it's kind of more degraded. You know, it's like, oh, it's not as important. It's not as artful. It's not as literary. And like, I have to actually, often when I'm writing, I try to write less dialogue because I fear that like, it's gonna just sound like a screenplay and it's not gonna be, you know, a text that kind of I can like immerse myself in the same way. So I'm not, again, I don't really know where that comes from, but maybe because I think of it as the easier, kind of less important thing, I don't worry as much about it, and that therefore it's allowed to kind of come in. I don't know. Like maybe that makes the dialogue better because I'm thinking like, oh God, don't write more dialogue. It's like, you know, write this other thing. But I don't know, Whitney. I don't know. I think dialogue though, I am interested in how to write it, not aiming for a natural effect and keeping in every like, you know, like pause, but sort of compressing it so much that you're getting maybe like half of what someone would actually say, and that's, so that is, I guess, a like technique that I try to use. Like I try not to say everything that the character would say in that moment. And I try to, when I write dialogue, I try to have at least a few junctures at which the characters aren't answering each other directly, because that happens in our own speech all the time. But sometimes when you get to like literary dialogue, I have a question I want to ask you. Okay, I'll answer the question directly. I mean, that it just feels, that feels wrong to me somehow.
A comment from one of your colleagues, Sharma Shields. I love red clocks. One of my faves.
That's how I feel about Sharma's novel, The Cassandra.
Yeah, it's a love fest. Here we are. We have time for one or two more questions. One of our scholarship recipients, Tara, this question is about, I think, just personal style and one's voice is what I'm getting from it. There were parts of this story that are so cringingly funny in a dark, ironic way. Did you set out to create that tone, or did it emerge in the writing process?
Hi, Tara. There's not a lot, when I set out, when at the beginning of something, I really don't have a lot in mind in terms of what I want the effects to be. Maybe because with each new project, whether it's a short story or a novel, it feels like so much is unknown about it that I'm just trying to latch onto characters or images, or maybe even kind of like a textural feel or atmosphere, rather than thinking about, is it going to be funny? Is it, and a lot of writers that, you know, will say like, the harder you try to make something funny, probably the less funny it will be. You know, if you're looking directly at the humor, then it might feel stilted or strained. So I was not particularly thinking about wanting to have like a dark, funny tone here, but I guess the more I thought about this character, the more I also wanted to, and you know, if you read the entire story, like one of the questions she asks the committee toward the end of the story is, she talks about how she's not a perfect victim, and how she herself, because she and Thaddeus have both been lying about various parts of their background and their, you know, relationship to Appalachian culture, and she's asking like I guess I did know that I wanted to write a character who could complicate our, like disrupt in maybe hopefully useful ways, like our sense of like who gets to be this like perfect victim of sexual harassment, because there's so much, you know, when Me Too cases are, say, like litigated in court, there's like a hideous emphasis on, you know, well, is the woman like really, you know, does she have her own problems? Like, is she lying? Does she have like issues? And it's as though like anyone should be this kind of superhuman, like perfect person in order to have been sexually harassed. And so that was probably my only intent. I wanted the narrator character to kind of have, you know, to be a person who might take pleasure in bleeding into the corn niblets at the salad station. So.
Well, this is just the beginning. I can't wait to see the rest of it. And yeah, send us whatever you can, whatever way we can get to it. And thank you so much for being a part of this, Leni. Maybe next year we'll have you here at the lake.
I really want to come to the lake. So one of our workshop members, Jenna, is at the lake, and she's been sharing some shots that we're all very, very jealous about.
Looks like they're in the lodge right now. Yeah.
And she told us which, like, there's like the alder and fir cabins and like the different good cabins. So I really want to come.
The giant ponderosas. You can, if you haven't yet gone into the inspiration tile, Whitney took a bunch of little videos of the Wallowa River and the surrounding area. I want to tell you folks about one thing before we go. We've been talking about building community, and at the end of every Summer Fishtrap, I kind of have to tear people away because they don't want to leave. And the way we can continue to build community, Fishtrap has a program called Become a Fish Trapper, and I just want to show it to you really quick. It's on our webpage, but I mean, almost anybody can afford to be a member. I mean, you don't have to but if you know anybody, or if you want to, for as little as $5 a month, you can just become a part of the community and support Fishtrap, and it really helps us out a lot. But enough about that. How about the rest of today's program? In a few minutes, in about 15 minutes, Laura Pritchett's year-long writers workshop, the one that's concluding, are going to do their final celebratory readings to see what they've been, it might be cool to see what they've been, hear what they've been working on all year. And then at 3 o'clock, the Fishtrap Fellows, the 2020 Fishtrap Fellows, are going to do a live reading. It's always one of the highlights of my week. So I encourage you to tune in for that. And then Mosley Wada at 4 p.m. Pacific time, followed by social hour. So thank you, Leni. Thank you all for being here.
Mike, will all of those this afternoon's reading be available later? Like if I click in later, can I watch them?
Yes. Within 24 hours. It takes us a while to upload the stuff. Okay. So you'll be able to see them later. And I think that's it. Thanks everybody. We'll see you as the day goes on.
Thank you for listening.